Just a minute. Hi, good evening. I am Ramon Costa. I'm a data protection specialist lawyer at Brazilian Network Information Center and a PhD candidate in law at Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro. I have the honor of moderating the latest panel, Data Protection in Contemporary Times, Perspectives and Connections Between the Global South. I thank the audience. Nice to see you all. I hope you enjoy. I would like to thank the Brazilian Network Information Center and the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee for the organization of the seminar. And also, I would like to thank to Internews, the organization that supports the ADAPT project, the project that our panelists are part of. And I have a special thank to Brazilian organizations that support the ADAPT project in Brazil, Coding Rights and Data Privacy Brazil, especially Mariana Rielli. Mariana, thank you so much for all your contributions. It was just essential for this panel, so thank you so much, Mariana. It's so much fun to do. And I have a special thank you, just a minute. Oh, of course, just thank our panelists, of course, and their organizations. So today we have here, the names is just complicated, but that's gonna be okay. Just a minute. Laura Henderson, she is a research and advocacy advisor at Internews. Khadija El Saman, she is a program officer for Anglophone West Africa at Paradigm Initiative. Veronica Salinas, she is a privacy and data protection director at Internet Bolivia. Ricardo Chica-Reino, he's a digital rights coordinator at Fundación Ciudadanía y Desarrollo. Meshach Masibo, she is a data protection scholarship at Kenya ICT Action Network. Emerson Bea Sefa, he's a law professor at Addis Ababa University. So thank you very much for your presence and for your valuable contribution. It's a really an honor for me. I'm really excited to listen to you, so I promise not to talk so much. Okay. Let me explain a little about this panel. In this panel, we have a different format. This is going to be a round table, so we will have questions to our international guests. And the idea is to learn a little more about data protection countries in Latin and African countries, and also about the importance of international projects to a global data protection country. So it's going to be amazing, I promise. I'm not so good with promise, but today I'm promising. The personal data protection is a global challenge and a transnational right. Therefore, it's essential to understand aspects such as social inequalities, legislation, and regulation in the debate on data protection. In this way, dialogue between different experiences allows us to observe and learn about different stages in terms of implementation of laws and development of the right to privacy and personal data protection. So, finally, let's hear our guests. And I'm going to start with Professor Mesembe. Professor, there is no general data protection law in Ethiopia, and the draft bills that exist are not close to being approved. But there is an issue of ostensible state surveillance. So can you tell us about civil rights as privacy and data protection are being developed in Ethiopia? And please introduce yourself.
Can you hear me? Thank you, Ramon. First of all, it's a real pleasure to be here. This is my first time to come to Latin America. I have been to parts of Europe, North America, Asia. I have never been to Latin America, so it's a real pleasure to make São Paulo my first, let's say, visit. I have noticed that, first of all, in terms of the discussions, debates, the discussion has really moved on because there is I think, huge progress made in terms of data protection in Brazil. We are just starting. As you said, we don't have now a law governing data protection, but we have pieces of legislation like the computer crime proclamation that kind of protects various kinds of illegal access, interference on data protection. So a kind of more, let's say, informal kind of protection, but we have now a draft bill that was drafted in 2020, so we hope that within this year or next year, there will be a move for the formal adoption of a data protection law. So that would also signal maybe more discourse and more awareness, and I guess in the area of data protection. But still, like you say, there is no comprehensive law. But also, I think in developing countries, I think there are also concerns and risks, like you say, like surveillance, for example, because you have to understand that with the opportunities that comes with, of course, big data and the ability to access massive data, there is also a danger where you don't have significant democratic, let's say, practice and, experience. So when that data can be used hugely, I think, for political persecution and other purposes. But the hope is that there is better democratic opinion now in our country. So the hope is that, I think, with that kind of more commitment for rights, better protection of data would be introduced. So that's, I think, more or less a very general idea of where we are now. So we still are lagging, but there is huge potential also because we are starting. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor. It's really important to have you here, and it's about all your experiences, so large experience in Ethiopia, so thank you so much for your answer. And the next question is for, Khadija Al-Saman. In Nigeria, Khadija, there is no general data protection law at a national level, but there are regulations that do not have the same status as hard law. Although there is an excessive collection of data, including biometrics, by the public sector especially. Can you tell us about this context in Nigeria and introduce yourself, please? Thank you so much.
Is my mic working? Okay, yeah. Okay, so my name is Khadija Usman. I work with Paradigm Initiative. I'm based in Nigeria, so like you said, I would be speaking about the Nigerian context. So just like Ethiopia, we do not have a data protection law. As a country that is just developing, we're still in the beginning stages when it comes to digital rights. When the Marco Civil, the internet was passed in Brazil, we tried to mirror that to get that passed in Nigeria. The legislative houses passed it, but the president did not assent to it. So as of this time, we do not have any comprehensive law that speaks to rights on the internet. Regardless, Nigeria has been collecting a lot of data. You need data for health services, banking services, to get your driver's license, your passport, all of that. Biometric information that is, put online. Recently, the government tried to deploy a digital identity system. You'd find that a lot of countries now are deploying digital identity, but ours came with a twist. If you did not register if you didn't go to register to get your digital ID, you were going to be banned from using SIM cards and telecommunication services. And this came in a country that does not have a data protection law. So we have specific provisions on data protection in sectors. So the central bank has one section in the act that says data will be protected, or the Child's Rights Act has one section in there that says your data will be protected, but it doesn't say how, it doesn't say where, it doesn't say who you go to when there is a breach. There's just so much missing, there's a huge gap in terms of data protection. You just know that you have a right to privacy, but after that, you don't really have any information. So there's a big distrust between the people and the government because the government is constantly collecting this data. There's a lot of surveillance, but there is no data protection. But it's also not, we also find that it's not a political priority. We had spoken about this outside with a few people, and I'm sure it's something that a lot of you can relate to. It is that, people are hungry, right? People are struggling with things like electricity. There are security situations, and then you come and tell them, hey, but privacy is an important right. And they're wondering, but there are more important things. And we find that that's the attitude that politicians have to these things, and a lot of people have to these things. So a lot of the work that we are having to do as an organization is to create awareness, right? So we're telling the people, this is a right you have, and it's a right that you have the right to enforce. We're also trying to tell the governments that it's something that is good for you economically, and then we're also trying to take matters about this to court so that the judiciary can learn more and know more about it so that these rights can be enforced better. So, just in time.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you, Khadija, for your brilliant answer. It's really important to have you here. And this panel actually is really important to us to understand more about specific context, especially in African countries, because we know so much about this here, Thank you so much for your answer. So the next one is Meshach Masibo. Meshach, Kenya has a data protection law and authority to regulate it, in addition to a specific constitutional guarantee of data protection. But we know that there are issues that limited the authority's independence. Can you tell us about the importance of the authority in Kenya and how you see the data protection in Kenya, especially about the role of the government in this context? And introduce yourself, please.
Okay. Can you hear me, I think? Okay. I think my name, it's a bit clear. If I say it, I'll be repeating, but I'm Meshach Masibo. I work for an organization called KICTANet. In full, it's Kenya ICT Action Network. It's based in Nairobi, and it largely works in shaping ICT policy, and particularly the data protection concept that he's mentioned. I think he's really phrased the question really well, and I think also my other fellow panelists have really just echoed things that are really similar across different levels and countries. So it is true that Kenya has a Data Protection Act, and also additionally it has regulations and just a very robust legal ecosystem when it comes to data protection in the country. I think the challenge we have, I think, which ties into the question, is an implementation challenge. So there are issues when it comes to implementing the actual act and the laws. And the body that is mandated to implement those acts and laws is the Data Protection Commissioner. So to tie in with what he's saying is the fact that it's the challenges that it faces in implementing what the act itself are. The common one is the resource challenge, the fact that it's financed with, I think, 50 million shillings. I do not know how to convert that, but it essentially means how it converts, because Kenyans, we're actually 50 million Kenyans, so how it converts is the commission has 1 shilling for each person, which is really not a lot of money. So there's that challenge, that it's a clear challenge that the agency faces, and then it undermines its ability to independently execute its mandate. And then the other bit is just teething problems, the fact that it's a new agency, it's trying to recruit. Actually, when you visit their website, it's when they're shortlisting their very first candidates to actually come and execute their role. So you see a situation where in my private capacity, or rather if you are filing a complaint and saying this company X is stealing people's data or is violating X and Y, it takes months for you to get feedback because the person who's supposed to respond to you hasn't been hired yet or is taking their interview. So there are those challenges when it comes to implementing the act, and also just the practicality of it. There are also challenges that affect its independence, because the resource bit and the two bits, also there are also practical challenges, because practically I've tried to register a data processor with the system. There are issues because they're still trying to roll it out, they're still trying to build the technical infrastructure, so there are issues with this back and forth. You engage with the commissioner, and you're not able to conclude what you're trying to do. So there are those primary challenges that affect its independence. There are those are the 3 core ones. I think the other ones we think we'd get some other time to. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Meshach. It's really important listening to you. In Brazil we have the data protection law and authority too, so it's really interesting understand more about the context in your country. Thank you so much. Well, until now we listened about specific context about sector public, government, the role of the state. And now I would like to ask about the civil society. And we have a really special person here for this, is Veronica Salinas. So my next question is for her. We know about the importance of the civil society in the development of the data protection culture. So, Veronica, you have a large experience in the civil society in Bolivia, and I have a question for you. How viable is currently the approval of a data protection law in Bolivia, and what is the role that civil society has that for the context?
Muchas gracias, estimado Raúl. Es para mí realmente un honor compartir este espacio.
Thank you, Raul. It's a great honor to share that panel with my peers, and I'm part of a consortium, Internet Bolivia, because the idea is to enforce the Global South activities. I'm so glad to be here participating at this amazing debate on data privacy and everything that you have been doing in Brazil. Within 4 years, what was just a norm became a law, and I hope that all countries would have a specific norms for data protection. We have learned from Brazil, from the Brazilian experience. And to be here in São Paulo as part of an organization who is working hard on the incidents to have a specific norm is like traveling to the future. I understand really well now what are the main debates, what are your needs and demands, and what have been your objectives. I thank you so much for this opportunity, and I would like to highlight the impact that data protection has in the exercise of democracy, to acknowledge the growth of digital economy in the globe and how we get close to the matter of data, and by that I mean raw material as economic growth or a fundamental right. That's key, and we have to understand all of that, especially once that we are getting very close to a specific regulatory framework. The way as civil society acts in Brazil, showing the possibility to enforce that law, and we can acknowledge that as an ability where this topic became a part of the public agenda. And some strategic alliances where several specific organizations are developing throughout content, strategies, incidents, decision-making process, generating investigation, and exercising its right and control of social participations, which is key for our civil society. Within the Bolivian setting, it's important to understand that social inequality is present over digital exercise, and it differs as to the quality to internet access, which impacts our Latin American societies. Therefore, we have to acknowledge the need to work jointly as part of one single group. And in the Bolivian case, we have to understand what is the real impact and consequences of not having a law for data protection. We have social, economic, and political reasons for that. Unfortunately, we have no more time, but let's, benefit from some other questions that will be asked in this panel.
Understand me? I'm an ambitious person. I hope you understand me. So, Ricardo, don't forget you. My next question is for Ricardo Chicarreno. So, Ricardo, Ecuador has a data protection law with application in the public and private sector. The country is in the process of drafting regulations that will define the practical application of the law, including more specific powers and attributions of the enforcement agents. As of right now, there are not any. Can you tell us about this context, please?
Oi.
Oh.
I'm trying my Portuguese here. Boa tarde. É prazer para mim estar aqui com vocês.
Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. The last time I was in São Paulo was 3 years ago. I came as a volunteer to do a job in São Carlos and was an enriching experience. Now I'm back after 3 years to be part of a very young new panel that is addressing personal data and more specifically in my country, Ecuador. And what Ramon said is true. We have approved our first organic law for personal data protection exactly 1.5 years ago. But we didn't issue any regulation yet. That has not been applied. Since I am here representing the Development Foundation, and together we are conducting a work with different strategic sectors of the population, public, private, academia, and civil society organizations. All of that to enhance and strengthen capabilities, and also to design a document that may be the one to erase what's taking place in Ecuador. Now I will share the structure and the content of the document, extraterritoriality, or as how we deploy it. Why extraterritoriality? That should not be uncertain in personal data protection law, especially the territory where that is applied, as there might be a conflict regarding the inappropriated process by international developers. In the law, they say that there is an exception, all editorial and news content. In Ecuador, the publishing content does not reflect, because they do not say what sort of publishing content that would be. And as part of our service of surveillance investigation, as part of civil society organization, that is quite empty. It's an empty gap. And last but not least, important, we don't have a sanction regimen that is being applied lately. That will take place as of May 2023. And neither we had a controllership that has to be done by the executive that suggests a social control, and they elect them. However, we didn't have such an advancement in the organic law of personal data. They say that Ecuador has just 2 years, and it's been almost 1.5 years and no additional efforts. So we should have a preventive focus and educative focus, so we can control the superintendents of personal data, can make able those civil servants, and just after that the overall citizenship, they should come at first. But citizens, they should be aware of personal data protection, and what are the limits to exercise privacy, and what are the boundaries and threshold for personal data protection. I'm really happy because we have learned a lot with the Brazilians, and I have several questions to all of you, and I hope that I can keep learning with you. Thank you.
From a new friend, you know, Laura Henderson. Laura, as a representative of organization meant to build a global network, how is it possible to set up and implement projects around different countries and their data protection laws, as well as brainstorm best practice and opportunities for cross-border collaboration?
Thank you so much. I just want to start by thanking a lot of people for us being here. First of all, the organizers, in part because you gave everyone drinks before our panel, so thanks for that. Also to Data Privacy Brazil for bringing us here, and also bringing together so many really wonderful people. Our wonderful fellows, you've heard a little bit from them, but they are so good. They're so amazing. I am constantly impressed. And now I feel like I come at the end of some really amazing conversations. So you asked me about how we can facilitate cross-border collaboration. And I just want to go back to something that Bianca said earlier today. She compared the 4 years of maturation for LGPD to the development of a child and the importance of being there through the child's early years to establish things. I think that's a really, really good metaphor, in part because you see the stages of our babies, our data protection babies. They need support. They need continuous support. You don't just give birth to them and leave them alone. You need to be there, and they need community. So it's lucky that we have this community here in Brazil, and hearing all of the things that you've talked about over the last 2 days. I mean, like, I'm American, so I'm impressed. I was glad that you didn't ask me about what's going on in the US, because if we're using the baby metaphor, I really don't want to talk about unborn children right now. Sorry about that. I had a glass of wine. But back to your actual question, collaboration. So part of this project, part of the reason that we wanted to establish this project is when, at least in the US and especially in Europe, when we talk about data protection, we talk about GDPR. And of course, GDPR is important. Of course, we need to think about that. Of course, it's a lot of the impetus for why things are being passed. People care about harmonization, they care about cross-data flows, but there's so much innovation and there's so much amazing stuff that's coming out of other countries. And so we wanted to hear from all of these amazing people and the organizations they work for and your organizations and learn. I am, coming from an American organization in DC, like, what do we know? Literally, what do we know about passing data protection laws? And in the really hard work that has to come with enforcing these really complicated laws, nobody knows the right answer. And so for us, it's really thinking about, what can we learn from each other? And I, again, want to underline and shout out the work that Data Privacy Brazil has done for this consortium. They really brought together these organizations in a series of workshops and asked them these exact questions. When it comes to public awareness raising, what have you done? What have you seen? What are the challenges you're facing? And how do we learn from each other? And how do we get better collectively? Because this is a cross-border issue, like, I constantly tell people I know in DC, you have to be listening to the Brazilians. Like, they know way more than you do. And shout out again to Rafa, because the FTC has an open call for public comments, that there should be public comments coming from outside of the US, because there's a lot of knowledge to be shared. So I will stop there, but thank you for the question. Again, thanks for having us.
On time. Thank you so much, Laura. It's really important. She leaves for the applause. Laura, I just have one more question. Tell me about the context in USA. I'm kidding.
Do you have like 3 hours?
so much. No more alcohol. Okay. Thank you so much, Laura. Now we have the second round, and this is going to be easier, just for me, because I don't have the responsibility to answer anything. But in the second round, it's really going to be easy, because in the second round of questions, we have the same question for all, and we can follow the same order of answers. So the question is, what are the main challenges you see in their countries for developing a data protection culture? And how do you see a path of a global convergence on the subject of data protection? Actually, are 2 questions, so sorry. Yes, please, Professor.
Thank you again for the opportunity. So, as we are starting on data protection, obviously, I think the biggest challenge for me is the knowledge gap that people have. Privacy issues, as much as they are so significant, they are not really still in the public consciousness. So it's more than awareness. Creating awareness is one, but, providing more, let's say, public consciousness that can trigger more public action for privacy issues, data privacy issues to come to the public conscience is becoming very huge. Some of the work we did in ADAPT was exactly to create that public awareness so that, you know, the data protection becomes a big issue in the country, and you know, more organizations and the citizenry is engaged in these issues. Another is technical and resource capacity. Now, you don't just adopt laws without having the physical, the institutional structure. So the draft law, for example, proposes for a data protection commission. Now, the discussion we have is that if you're going to create an independent commission, you need the human resource to supply and to provide the technical capacity and the financial capacity to run that agency or authority. So there is huge, I think, also experience to get from maybe Brazil. I think one of the most important, significant aspects of the engagement that I see is that instead of taking models from Europe or North America, Brazil could be also a very good example, because from what I see, you have a very advanced, you know, legal framework and institutional framework to advance the cause of privacy rights. So we always take, you know, European models in terms of legislative frameworks. So why not maybe have a look at, you know, the work done in Brazil in terms of this regard? So you see capacity and significant also knowledge gap. Another thing is, of course, political priorities. You know, sometimes, as Khadija said, the political priorities of these states are different. So conflict, you know, and poverty and all these issues sometimes cloud also the significance of privacy issue. So we need to push the agenda of privacy as it is significant. So we see that as well. Surveillance, I have mentioned that, you know, in developing countries and in transitional democracies, the democratic base is not significant. So when you allow government actually to have the capacity to have that massive data, including, you know, biometric data, how is it going to be handled? So that's also, I think there are good democratic practices emerging in Africa, including Ethiopia, but, you know, authoritarian hangovers are still there. So we need to be very cautious in terms of how, because I think there is a significant also power imbalance. You know, we are helpless data subjects individuals. The data controllers are either government or corporations. So in that kind of dynamics, you know, how do you really make sure that me, the helpless individual, who is giving this huge amount of data, how is that data going to be protected? So this is also another huge challenge, I think. The new thing is that, you know, now, just last week, the Council of Ministries in Ethiopia approved a new legislation on digital electronic national ID. So that also complicates the handling of personal data, because, as you know, electronic digital data has also facial recognition, you know, iris scan, and very, what we call not just personal data, but highly sensitive personal data. So once you give that, how is it going to be handled? You know, that's also a major issue. Unless you have very transparent, independent, you know, more democratic-oriented, you know, data handling, then it becomes very problematic. These issues are also very significant. But in general, if you look at the African perspective, we have not moved much, because currently there are about 32 African states with more or less a draft and data protection law, but the implementation has not been as much. So a lot to say, but I think I will leave it here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Khadija, your time, please.
So before we started, we had an inside joke that he was going to say everything that there was to say. And he has successfully done that. But I imagine that our answers to this would be very similar, because I have a list here and you really did almost exhaust it. But for us, one of the things that I think would be unique to Nigeria is sort of reconceiving the agenda for data protection. You know, right now, the government is looking at technology and technology companies as a cash cow. So in creating a data protection agency, so fun fact, we have a data protection agency, but we don't have a law, so I don't know how that works. But so you can sort of see that the political agenda is messed up there. The priorities are sort of like maybe to create jobs for people as opposed to actually doing the job. So one of the biggest issues there is sort of reconceiving what the political agenda is. And the second thing would be for the quality of the laws to evolve, the nature and the quality of the laws, no longer having sector-specific laws where it's, you know, a little piece thrown in there, but detail that actually serve people. So we're looking at, you know, quality laws that also address certain contexts. I know that we have a saying in this fellowship that privacy is global, and I think that is the biggest convergence point in terms of data protection. But we also have unique contexts that need to be addressed. So as opposed to, you know, swallowing a GDPR and throwing it everywhere and just putting, you know, the first letter of your country in front of it, it's like an NDPR or a BBPR. Let's have actual laws that, you know, look into the context of a people and address their own needs when developing policy, strategy, and legislation. So another thing I think is necessary is where legislation does not exist, we need to interact with courts more. So I don't know how many people engage in strategic litigation, so you're going to court, sometimes knowing you're not going to win, but in the interest of creating some level of precedent, right? So you want to make sure the judges exercise their brains and learn more about these things. Judges are usually like really old guys that don't know how to use their computers. You know, it's some assistant that is using it for them. They're scared of using the internet. We have to make sure that they address these issues. So sometimes even when you know that you're not going to win, you need to take it to court so that the next person that comes, the judges would have read more, learnt more, and would have created some level of precedent that makes it better for other people to come and enforce their rights. This is more unique, of course, to countries who don't actually have legislation to stand on, but I imagine it would be helpful in other situations that you're trying to develop. So yeah, I would stop there.
Shag, please.
Okay, thanks. And I think I'll start with, probably I wouldn't have another chance to say how beautiful I think your country is. It's very beautiful and very sort of energetic, and everyone is active. It's different. I think in Kenya we are more logical, but you guys are very active and happy, and it's really exciting to just experience that bit. I think the bit about being in a sort of captivating panel is I get so immersed in what everyone else is saying. Even I think I forgot bits of the question. So could you please just sort of re-say the question and then I'll answer it? Yeah.
Of course. So the question of the second round, there are two questions. What are the main challenges you see in their countries for developing a data protection culture? And how do you see a path of a global convergence on the subject of data protection?
Yeah, okay, interesting. Yeah, interesting. So I think much like what I think everyone else has shared, I think our core challenge even in Kenya, it's an awareness challenge. It's there. And I think I'd just say a basic narrative. When in the run-up to that, we've had elections this year. I've heard you also having elections soon, but you had elections this year. In the course of elections, political candidates used to send messages. They get your data from somewhere, they scrape it from somewhere, and then they send you targeted messages telling you to vote for person X or person Y. My own mom, got a similar message like that, being told that on this day, go and vote for this and this person. That meant her information had been stolen from somewhere, or someone had taken information without her consent and wanted her to vote for them. So I told her, do you know what? They are breaching your right to privacy. Then she asked me, what is privacy? Yeah, and so she's a fairly educated person. So it just goes to show how there's a huge awareness gap in terms of people understanding what it means, sort of their rights and all that. So it's sort of the first thing that hinders a culture, just a rights, sort of a privacy respecting culture. There's just huge lack of awareness in just the general sort of population. And beyond that, I think the other things I'd mentioned, the fact that it's also at the implementation level, trying just sort of to implement the act, there are issues technically implementing it, the resources, the fact that the commission is resource-strapped, the fact that it's still trying to hire, it's still trying to operationalize, to become independent, to sort of gain more teeth. And I think the question also brings out a really important thing, because I think there's a cross-border nature of, in terms of data breaches, especially what we've experienced as a country, something like Cambridge Analytica and all of the in the 2017 elections, they have a cross-border angle to them. So I think there are also larger issues, like even we have local issues with companies like Facebook and how they're handling people's information and just their policies. The fact that we often feel they do not respect people's right to privacy and their data protection rights, but we are unable to air them because of we're told we are, for lack of a better term, lightweight in certain sense. So it's harder for you to advocate against a big tech company, against a big corporation as one country. So I think the key way forward for that is to be able to galvanize voices together and say, okay, we're going to approach it from a global south perspective. And let's say if you're coming and saying, we have an issues with your corporate structure, with the structure, how you're handling your privacy policies and how you're handling the local people or people from our particular demographic. So it's that collaborative energy is what will be able to get them to listen to our demands, also change what they are doing to keep them in line with our local context. So beyond that, also just appreciating just beyond big tech, just the general view that especially in the global south and Africa as a context, it's an interconnected concept. Like it's very interconnected. Someone breaches even the whole issues of if you're transferring information illegally to a different part of the continent or a different part of the world, and then from that content it's breached or it's shared without the consent of the original owner. Implementing, enforcing against that needs you to spread your wings beyond your original location. So I think that's how I see in terms of the challenges, and that's why if we synergy. I think that the ultimate solution is a synergy, a galvanization of efforts towards advocating together as a global South community, as opposed to one individual country. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Gracias. Yo quería adicionar un comentario sobre, me imagino todas las sociedades pasan
I
por
would
esto.
like to add something, and I think all societies go through this, for us to think of the negative impact that this can have with a negative opinion in terms of data protection or anything related to digital aspects of society. In the case of Bolivia, this is very difficult, and it can be a little bit difficult to moderate or to find the impact on the opinion of what people think is to regulate the exercise of freedom of speech, for example. This is something important for us to take into account to implement the data protection culture. It's also important to see a strategy in how to get to decision makers, to politicians, legislators, and how to adopt this new legal framework, and this will call for institutionality and also funding. So it's difficult to do that and to say that to decision makers because they demand independence the most. And you all are aware of the processes and how difficult this may be. Other important issues for the understanding of public opinion and people is precisely what happens in experience. For example, in this auditorium, is that yes, there are some norms and of people, not just a framework that will tell them where they should go if a certain right is breached or violated, but it's a new repertoire that you give to people, a repertoire and a narrative that is specific so that they may effectively exercise their right to privacy in this case. Also the theme of assigning legitimacy to public policies so that have this value which is not just economic value, but also a value that any public policy must be based on data, information that is clear. And so this narrative is related to the creation of new legal values, and the current one shows us that we cannot continue without looking at this need. There is a demand related to a global context that won't respect any kind of border. So basically, these are the main challenges for us to develop the data protection culture in my country.
Bueno, en Ecuador, lastimosamente no hay voluntad política, pese a que hemos movido esfuerzos desde las organizaciones de la sociedad civil.
With the organizations of civil society in order to build or feedback documents with observations. So, for example, the legal and for the presidency, and we haven't heard anything from them. So I believe that it is standing to do this. That is related to civil society. Why do I say that? To promote that citizenship is aware of their rights and they can exercise their rights. And also that in the handling of personal data, the law is applied. And lastly, so that measures of security are applied that are effective. Now, talking specifically about the law, we need to follow the general data protection of Ecuador. So these rules should not be neither redundant nor excessive, but it should cover all rules that are necessary. Also, assigning control and a better training and standards for the protection of personal data. And lastly, the creation of an authority for personal data protection to look after the protection of data that are financial, operational, personal. So more and more in our regions, artificial intelligence is dealing with public services, government platforms, and it is necessary to cover the digital gaps that exist, for example, in rural zones of our country or our countries in general. Also, it is necessary for us to join forces as civil societies, not just national experience, for example, in Ecuador, but also here. So it would be very good in your experience as a country, Brazil, you could come closer to us so that we could collaborate jointly. Even so, I would like to thank NIC.br, CGI, and Internews to allow me to represent the foundation, the Fundación Cidadania e Desarrollo, the Foundation Citizenship and Development for the protection of personal data in Ecuador. We want to get to citizens in a creative way so that to demystify our digital rights, and this is something that will be increasingly talked about in our societies. Thank you very much.
Okay. So I'm going to have blatant self-promotion, as the American should. So we worked with many people on this panel and in this room recently to put together a report based on interviews and focus group workshops with regulators and civil society from 11 countries in Africa and Latin America about the challenges that they're facing when it comes to implementing and enforcing data protection laws. And so I can talk from a researcher perspective, so I'll push up the glasses on my nose that don't exist and just say, and I'm basically repeating everything that all these brilliant people already said, but these are some of the things that we found from this research, and again, self-promotion, but we just translated the report into Portuguese and Spanish. So I encourage you to read it because I can't say everything that's in it, and we really want people to read that report and some of our other resources and see how we can take these kinds of conversations forward. But first, there's a real need to cultivate local expertise in a lot of these countries. I think that a lot of the people that we've worked with, there are 1 or 2 organizations in their country that are even thinking about data protection. And that's a problem because you need to be able to advocate, you need to be able to convince policymakers who, as our panelists have said, have a lot of competing priorities that this is an important thing, but also if the only motivation for passing data protection law is a harmonization with Europe, then you are really only doing it to check the box and not to actually protect the data rights of citizens of the country. And so there needs to be an effort from countries like Brazil, who have so much expertise, to work with organizations in other places to really build that up and be able to be the advocates that they need to be. Second, independence is key. I don't need to tell you that. I know that you experience that all the time. And so financial and structural independence, that's something that came up over and over again. And for organizations that work in countries that haven't passed laws, your experiences are really important for them to hear about, so that they can really convince governments that, yes, you have to put resources towards an independent regulatory authority. And then third, in every country around the world, we really need to push for actual cultures that respect data, and that's a long-term, hard process. That means working with the private sector, really understanding their needs, the things that don't work for them, working with them. It means, as has been said on this panel by Khadija better than I can say, working with the old judges. We've had the pleasure to work a little bit with IDEC. I know the work that they're doing to really think about cultures of court systems, and innovation is really key. And then also the general public, another very self-promoting thing. We worked with all of the organizations on the stage to put together, to co-produce podcast episodes, in part because I really like telling lawyers that they have to do something that's not law. But pushing people who have expertise, who talk about things technocratically, to talk about data harms in a normal way that works for normal people. You can talk to your grandmother or your aunt about. And then let's talk about big tech. Is anyone from Meta in the room? I think that we saw, with the Save WhatsApp campaign, what's possible when countries in the global south come together and think about all of the resources that are at the disposal. And you see organizations in the US start to pay attention, and of course, there's so much power here. So litigation, thinking about what's possible from consumer protection, what's possible from competition, and working together. And then that is my final point, is collaboration. The more that you all can help everybody else, the better things get. So that's what this project is really about, and I really hope that we can take some of these things forward. So support all of these people, exchange business cards. Do we still do that? And yeah, I'll just end there.
Thank you all. It was amazing. I need to say, I love this panel because it's like my first TV show, Data protection, your mind, with Ramon Costa. But so, do we have questions in the audience or online, please?
Boa noite. Estão me ouvindo? Agora foi.
Good evening. Can you hear me? My name is Arthur. I am from Acotune Lab. I would like to thank, on behalf of Acotune Lab, the directors who are sitting just next to me, Carolina, Paulo, Renan, José Vito, Isabel. And your talk was really sensational. And I'm going to get my cheat sheet. And then everything we say about data protection, we kind of import it from Europe. And you know that South America as a continent, and North America and Africa, all these continents outside Europe have other issues and other problems. And then our needs sometimes are different from the needs of Europe. How can we contribute amongst each other, we in the Americas, South America, North America, Africa, in terms of data protection, and to have more intense and closer contact and solve our problems through sharing between us? Thank you very much. Good evening. Good evening. Thank you for being here. I am Paulinho, and I work for an organization called Data Lab. And many of us are working to ban facial recognition in public security. And we have had many initiatives and very nice actions that are aligned with this debate. And now we are preparing to talk to with the population, overall, general population, so that we can bring and answer this biggest challenge that almost of you touched on, awareness of privacy. And we have a major challenge, which is to talk about privacy as part of this theme. And the population that suffers the most from that, which is the Black population, they have other very urgent priorities. And we are choosing to do this, and we are thinking of capturing the audience and attention with a discourse that is the government is investing loads of money in a technology that is flawed, instead of using the same money in a technology, instead of spending it elsewhere. And then I could not fail to use this opportunity to ask from you, so what? What do you think of this idea of talking about this theme, not just in terms of privacy, which is very important, yes, but more in terms, man, the government is spending money in something that is not good for us. It's bad. So do you think this might work? Or do you have any other suggestions of paths for us to go forward with this debate? Thank you.
Well, yeah. We have one more online. Mariana? Yes, Mariana, please.
Well, first of all, thank you all for the brilliant appointments. I love to hear you all. And we have a question here. If you had one chance to give one advice for the Brazilian data protection future in Brazil.
Really?
Sorry. What would you say? Just one.
Oh my God. Good look. So, you can answer this free, and please.
Thank you. So I think the first question was, if I get it right, on what kinds of models we take from laws instead of, for example, taking the GDPR, why not engage? I think for me, the relevance of this engagement is also exactly that, because I think it's better to have, even if there are institutional and normative experience sharing, for me, the political economic positioning of Brazil is more closer to Africa, I would say. It's still very advanced, but there is a lot to learn because of many things, I think. So we need to nurture that. And instead of looking at only European developments in law and privacy, I think the South-South cooperation in terms of the political economic positioning might be interesting. Always there are local peculiarities, of course, that we need to take care of. But I think there is great lesson to learn from experiences like Brazil, who have advanced, I think, in data protection regimes and normative settings. So that's what I would say. So maybe also, I think the second question, I missed that, but yeah, maybe Khadija will reflect on that.
I have a lot to say on that, but he has a response to the first question still, okay. So.
Bueno, hola.
Well,
aquí se puede ver esta
here it is
desarticulación.
possible to see that there is a misarticulation between the Brazilian government and civil society organization, especially your second question, when there is a misalignment. There is not good communication, not good collaboration, no work, joint work, so that you could suggest your proposals so that your proposals should be considered and to reach a consensus. So it goes to the question number 3. My suggestion for Brazil specifically regarding this theme is to define more spaces and involving more the government and the public sector so that you establish a clear and good communication where demands of the society in general could be heard.
quisiera aprovechar un poco para hablar
I
sobre
would
la
like to
primera.
take the opportunity to talk about the first question, because this is precisely what makes the Bolivian process right now. So we are copying a foreign policy, a foreign rule, of foreign standards. So we are adopting standards to our reality, and we are precisely trying to make the participative process of society joint with many stakeholders and social subject to feed into this process that comes from civil society. Precisely, and the many organizations in different cities in Bolivia, we were gathering, for example, parents that are very much worried about the safety of their children and adolescents, and also protection, for example, of that are related to sexual orientation and preferences. So LGBTI in Bolivia. And so, for example, political interferences. And so to minimize the political impact as leaders, for example. So we are resorting to different sectors in society, and now we want this standard although it's a standard, for example, the Brazilian has and others have to answer to a domestic context, which is ethnical, as it is in Colombia. So this is something that we want to adopt in a specific context. So I cannot give any advice to Brazil with that regard, because I am here as a raider trying to pick up and learn some things. But I think it's important not to forget that privacy is a human right, and to discuss and generate more content from this perspective to see how this is related to all other human rights. So if you forget that, also due to the impact, and maybe this is just a tool to regulate, sanction economically companies, and no more than that. And so it would be good to generate content, and this would serve for everything else.
Okay. So just addressing the second question, which it was more or less asking how we would go about awareness, especially towards Black people and, the competing priorities. So I found that question quite exciting, because a lot of the work that I've been doing in terms of data protection in my country at this time is focused on creating awareness. So generally, right, I'm sure those who do research here would tell you, you do a lot, you write. Laura was just plugging a report, but how many people are going to read it, right? Only those who actually need it, the academics like the professor here, those are the only people who would actually read the reports. You'd find that, especially with our attention span now as a generation, the younger people, you need to translate this information into an easier way for them to consume. So Laura was talking about podcasts. As an organization, Paradigm Initiative has done 2 short films. So we tried to translate digital rights issues in Africa into a film for people to watch and see, and just create new contexts. We also, during this project, recently we just released a radio drama of 3 episodes where we tried to put together what data privacy issues would look like on an everyday, in an everyday conversation to people. So you're no longer talking in abstracts, right? You're not using the big words. You're not saying data protection, privacy, and all the words that an average 16-year-old doesn't understand. You're putting it in a drama in a way that they can relate. And in terms of how to couch the message of awareness, you want to use what is important to those people. Now, for the black people, I don't know too much about Brazil, but I'd like to say everybody likes money, right? So you want to connect their privacy to their money, for instance. It's like, if you do not have your data privacy, you're going to lose money because so and so and so. Connect it to what the people find important. So you would find that somehow your data is connected to the health systems. So you have to frame it in that context so that they can relate to it, so they can take it personally, and they can they can now advocate for it. Once people have taken that issue personally, the advocacy will go beyond you. You're no longer telling them, they're now telling their friends, hey, don't do this, hey, don't do this. You should advocate for this or against this. So in terms of what we would do better, or what we would tell Brazil, we're not in the position. We're really not in the position to say anything, but just listening to what everyone has said in the panels today, I would say it would be to ban facial recognition.
I also want to sort of give a comment on...
Can you hear me? To the first question about how to continue to do this kind of collaboration, is that right? Honestly, I think that money is key. We came at this with money. It is easy to say we will collaborate, but you all know it's hard work that you're doing just getting stuff done in Brazil. And so there needs to be more support from philanthropies, funders, governments to build spaces. I know that NIC.br has been doing this for a really long time, but like bring people together, have these conversations, because without money, everybody's doing it on a volunteer basis. You're all activists, you already do enough on a volunteer basis. So I would say that. On the facial recognition, first of all, your work is amazing, so keep doing what you're doing. I've loved seeing the way that organizations are learning from each other, again, in jurisdictions. I know that there's been talk with the organizations in Oakland and in other places in the US, and you're all learning from each other, and going at the procurement is so smart. So keep doing that work. And to what Khadija said, yes, no one's gonna read my report, I know, but maybe people in this room will. But when it comes to telling stories, I just wanna highlight some of the other work that's being done by the people on the stage and their organizations, because Khadija mentioned the radio drama. Ricardo and FCD just put together a fictional story. It's like a satire that is set in a bank when there was the national data leak in Ecuador, and everyone in the bank is blaming everyone else. And you know, we're trying to tell these stories in ways that really get people to care, because I know in Ecuador that everybody's data being leaked made people care. So thinking about windows of opportunity, thinking about narratives. And I know that Internet Bolivia's work, like when they had a national legislation that maybe was going to go through, and then there was a political crisis, what do you do at that point? Did they give up? No, they went to the local level. They went to municipal level, and they started talking to people about what they care about when it comes to data. And I remember talking to Eliana and being like, she was like, we didn't think they were gonna care. And people did care. They cared about their children's data rights. They cared about women in government who are being harassed, and they linked that to their privacy. So we have to listen to regular people and find out what they care about and talk about it that way. And then what I would say to Brazil, my first thought was, there's a song, Be Thankful for What You Got. But that's my like petty American side, because we can't pass anything ever. But I will say, keep going in what you're doing and pushing things forward for Brazilian citizens, but also keep supporting and being that model, I think, for other countries. So you're inspiring to all of us, especially me.
I wanted to also make a brief comment on I think the bit of the second question about boosting think, awareness, and also just a bit of a tie into what Hadija had shared. What Kictanet we've been trying to do, in addition to just trying to contextualize it to the audience, is we made use of social media platforms. So we made use of Twitter because you see, like everyone has access to Twitter. So in addition to you breaking things down to in a way that sort of someone understands and cares, you also do it you sort of make use of social media platforms like Twitter. So we run a program called Data Privacy Awareness 101. So every week we break down tweets, small 140-character tweets on data privacy. This is who a data subject is. This is who a data right person is. In like 140 characters each, and you're able to sort of reach a wider audience than, I think, other strategies. So that social media bit, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, it's really, really powerful. And also another thing we've sort of seen in boosting awareness is when you're doing awareness, like hosting tweets, this is what we call tweet chats or tweet sessions, you sort of try and, a bit of what she said, try and show the person the cause and effect. So you had an issue in Kenya where there was the telecommunications companies, the big ones, they were taking pictures. They say they were registering SIM cards, but they were actually taking people's pictures when they didn't need to take people's pictures. And for the large bit, I think for a larger bit, people didn't care. But when we had a tweet space and you'd explain to them and say, okay, when they take your picture like this, there are chances that they will profile you based on how you look. They will target you with advertisements based on how your facial symmetries look. It can be a reason for you to be profiled based on your appearance and whatnot. People started to care. So also it's important to just show that cause and effect and make use of social media platforms as an avenue of building awareness. Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Well, we have more free questions in the audience. Of course we have. My audience is the best audience. So.
Hi, posso falar em português? Posso? Depois de uns vinhos vai ser difícil falar em outro idioma, viu?
I have a hard time speaking another foreign language. First of all, I'm deeply grateful to the panelists. I need to admit that this was one of the panels that I was waiting for the most. So when I think of Global South, objective technologies that are produced in the Global North, and we need to think of us as subjects, as protagonists, as actors, and take the Industrial Revolution to zero, think of technological advancements centered on our realities, our values, to think of the Global South and these technologies is fundamental for human development, and how we can use this window of opportunity to use our skills centered on our needs and our values. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Rafael. I have a master's degree in law and regulation, and I studied platform moderation and online content management. And I could not miss the opportunity of asking about the subject of my research and to hear your take on that. So first of all, I'm going to be very brief. I defend content moderation as any interaction that these platforms and social networks of the contents that are produced by users. So indications of user timelines, so the withdrawal of contents from platforms, the withdrawal of users that are taken out from those platforms, and thinking of those platforms as major tech companies that are based in the Global North. And with that regard, my question is, how is platform governance, how can it reflect the values of the Global South in a context that many fundamental rights are exercised in a platform? So look for jobs in LinkedIn, we go for political choices, we share memories, we spend good times with our friends. And how can the governance of platforms reflect our values? I will give you an example that we experienced in Brazil. So we found that a certain indigenous community had a low compliance to vaccination in COVID-19 pandemic, and they found that there was a misinformation campaign specific for that community using that community's language, which made it virtually impossible to moderate that content. So thinking of this example and this type of challenge, how can virtual platforms reflect our values and think of our needs? And once again, I would like to thank very much all panelists. You're all brilliant.
Hello, my name is Milena. I love the panel. Congratulations to you all. I have, it's not a question, it's more a suggestion. I heard that you all have difficulties to communicate privacy to others, and we have that difficulty here in Brazil. I work here with legal innovation, and we are testing some methodologies to try and make that communication efficient. So I don't know if you ever heard of legal design and visual law methods, and we are testing this right now with documents, legal documents about privacy, privacy announcement, terms and conditions, and everything. So it's more of a suggestion, but I wanted to know about you, if you ever heard about these methods or not, and if these methods would be useful to you in your countries. Thank you.
Hello, good evening. I'm trying in English even after 2 glasses of beer. First of all, thank you for the event, NIC.br and CGI.br. And second, thank you for coming. I hope your experience has been well, and enjoy Brazil. You are always welcome here. It's very important to us to understand a little bit more how the other countries, even neighbors and not neighbors, are in terms of privacy. My question is to Laura specifically. You told about the federal act in the US since 2021. And as you know, the US has two privacy acts in California and in New York. In your opinion, do you think it's better to have a federal law or how can I say, state laws? And to others, you told that your country is a baby in terms of privacy law, and how the country is applying the sanctions if the country is already applying. Okay, thank you.
I really thought I was going to be able to not talk about the US. So I think that it's been out of frustration and impatience that we've passed the state laws, and I think they're really important because companies all of a sudden want federal privacy because they will need to harmonize. Personally, I would really like to have a federal privacy law just because it means that everybody who lives in the United States has the same rights, and also because I just think it will make it easier to enforce. And you know, fingers crossed for the current legislation. It's the closest that we've gotten, but we're also heading into midterm elections, so window is closing, and it's very complicated. So I think if we could have any sort of federal privacy law would be better than what we have now. And you know, when it comes to soft power, it's kind of embarrassing being an American. Actually, I really like it, being an American and talking about data protection, because we're behind. I mean, we're not engaging in these conversations in ways we should at the global level. So I think having learning from GDPR and what's worked and maybe what's been harder, like no one is pretending that GDPR's enforcement has been the greatest thing. I mean, I think if you talk to the Irish DPA about capacity, they will laugh at you. So I just think we need to be learning from each other as we're building new legislation. I want to say to you, I need to get your card. I'm so old. I need to get your contact information. I agree with you. There's just got to be better ways to talk about these things. We constantly talk about notice and consent as something like we need to throw it out the window, and the law is really important for making that happen. But let's talk about these things and present these things in ways that people can understand. And yes, you should share all your information with all of them, absolutely. Platform moderation, not my area of expertise, but I do think that because governments like to talk about fake news, disinformation, content moderation, we should just redirect it back to it being a data collection and privacy issue. The reason that all of these things happen is because the algorithms are opaque and because there are no laws governing it, and manipulation can happen, and they know a lot of stuff about us. Lots of different actors who are shady can get our information on the internet. And so those conversations, I think, need to be linked more because they're often very separate, and one of them feels sexy, and then the other one often is not so sexy. But I think sexy. Just so we're clear.
I think maybe just to respond to Rafael's question, I think it's a very good question, and thank you for your interest also. I think there is also, we talked so much about challenges and problems. I think when you have problems, it's also an opportunity. So, you know, in the Global South, I just read a recent report by the World Bank. If the current internet penetration rate, which is about 35%, if you double that and becomes around 70%, the amount of GDP that is generated is close to $2 trillion, actually. So there is massive, actually, opportunity in terms of digitization and, you know, internet connectivity and the economic gains that can bring. So as much as there are huge challenges as well, I think, you know, utilizing the digital space and, you know, having the infrastructure has also huge economic potential. So even just doubling the internet penetration, imagine generating $2 trillion. So that's massive, I think, economic potential, and that's why I think we need to be concerned about the internet ecosystem generally. In terms of content moderation, I agree completely that because now, for example, I studied freedom of expression. If you look at the First Amendment protection of freedom of speech in the United States and the level of legal protection that we have domestically, it's completely different. Whereas, you know, Facebook, Twitter, all have these contents that are universally accessible, that have no, you know, very sophisticated moderation. If you remember, by the way, Facebook admitted in its governance review board that some of the contents that it was generated through Facebook has actually fueled violence in Ethiopia. They did affirm that. So now they are taking more caution. I see that there are employees working in Addis, for example. More investment is now generated by these tech companies. And on a moral reason for me, I think, there is huge responsibility by these tech companies, because if you look at Meta or Facebook, how much money does it have? I mean, $6 billion probably, even more. The amount of capital it generates. Yet there is lesser responsibility. So I think in terms of content moderation, I think there is also a moral reason that we need more obligation and more work on that, I think. And it's a very good question, I think, also from the Global South perspective. I think partly because as much as the digital space has great democratic potential to improve governance, it can also undermine, you know, peace and security and, you know, urgent needs for individuals to be protected. And if it fuels violence, if it fuels hate speech, then it becomes a problem than a solution. So we need to have more work on content moderation. And I think the tech companies, realistically speaking, have acknowledged their problems, which is good. So they have themselves admitted that, and more work needs to be done on that front. Yeah, thank you.
So there's this huge sign saying timeout. And there is so much still to be said, but I'm going to try to rush through because I have a response for everybody. So first thing on content moderation, I'm about to say something very controversial, but I think Meta's model is in the right place, in the sense that they do this thing where they call on people in specific communities to contribute to how certain content should be moderated. You know, what would be hate speech and stuff like that. So I was once on a community consultation on abuse on Muslims and what we Muslims would see as being hate speech, and stuff like that. So it's why I love the democratic process in an ideal situation, is that you bring different people in a room, everyone has a voice. We get to say what we think is right, what we think is wrong, and then come to like a central conclusion. And I feel like that is where we should, that is the approach we should take in terms of content moderation. It's not someone waking up from some place being offended by something and saying, you know, take this out, cut this, cut this, cut this, without necessarily involving the people who it directly affects. So I feel like that is how we should look at it. And no, I've never heard about the methodology before, and I think it's worth discussing. In terms of the, so I'm clearly rushing through this, right? In terms of punitive measures, I mentioned very briefly earlier that we don't have a remedy pipeline. So what we do right now is, the Constitution says your right to privacy is guaranteed, but this Constitution was passed in 1999, and it only specifically mentioned that your rights using telecommunication services, which was like as far as technology had gone at the time the Constitution was being written was, and that was as far as the eyes of the draftsmen could see. So now you have to go to court to try to enforce those rights and try to translate how far technology has gone. But besides that, it's been really difficult to enforce it. You kind of have to go through loopholes. So the lawyers in the room would know where there's no specific, where there's no one specific route, right? You try to connect A to B to C to D, and finally get at a point where you're asking for some sort of remedy. So that's kind of what we're doing at this time, which is why I mentioned strategic litigation earlier. But all our lives would be so much easier if we just had a data protection law. So yeah, that is it.
Can I just say one thing before these lights caused me to have a seizure? No one ever thanks the translators, and I know they're mostly here for us. So thank you, translators, for your work today and yesterday.
So, Ricardo, Veronica, and Michelle. Okay. So, we have a short time for final considerations too. Just 1 minute, you know. I'm afraid about the time, but today I think it's a good day to be brave. No, I'm kidding. I'm really kidding. Please help me.
I'm just excited to go to Samba after this. But really, thank you all for being the last people in the room. 6 p.m. Really, it's been a real pleasure, I think. I speak for myself, but I know for my team, just to be here and to hear from you all, it really is mind-blowing how far along you are in these conversations and the communities you've developed. I remember when Marco Civil was passed, and I was like, thank God. And it's only, I know you've dealt with a lot politically, so the fact that you've kept going and gotten through and have what you have is just like a symbol of hope for at least me. So that's...
Yeah, just a few words, I think, to say. Obviously, that we're very excited to be here, and thank you for all the organizers for inviting us to share our views. I believe the digital space has transformational value for society, and the objective is how do you make it secure, ensuring privacy, security, and the integrity of, the digital system. And that's the ultimate objective. And I think there is great experience in Brazil, I would say, that we can learn. Finally, I would like to say also that the Internet Governance Forum is going to be in Addis Ababa next this November 28th, I think. So everybody would be welcome in Addis, and I'll be happy to host you and facilitate. But it's a pleasure to be here, so thank you.
Okay, I'm tired of talking, so thank you so much for having me here. It's my first time in Brazil as well. It's my first time in this part of the world, actually. So it's been a fantastic experience, and I look forward to experiencing the city. I know this is not what I was supposed to say, but I'm out of words, so thank you.
Eu falei tudo, gente. Bueno, quería agradecerles, les admiro.
I would like to thank you all. I admire greatly all organizations who are here, every organization dealing with digital rights in native languages. And in Ecuador, we are addressing this. I'm very hopeful for my country, and I'm going back home with many models, many things that I want to implement in my country. So thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. So I also like to thank, I'm very happy to have been able to be present here, to be here, the translation, and this has been a wonderful space to share all our thoughts and ideas. And I have learned many lessons that I'm going to take back to my country, and also the alliances in civil society. All of this is very important. Thank you very much.
I think likewise, I think like everyone else, I've learned a lot, and I also really have actually really enjoyed the experience. My last recommendation is that I think this conversation should not be a one-time thing. I think it should be a continuous conversation. I suggest if maybe there's people signing with emails or something, this can be like the content of a continuous thread. Like, I don't know if you know Quora, we just talk about best practices and just have it as a continuous thing as opposed to a one-time sort of conversation. That's my, sum it all. Thanks.
Thank you all. It was an honor. And the best part is now I have so many international friends. Thank you so much. E eu tenho 2 recados em português. Vou poupar os tradutores que fizeram um excelente trabalho. A gente tem disponível um link no YouTube que também vai ser enviado por e-mail de vocês para vocês fazerem uma avaliação do evento.
To assess this conference, and I hope it's positive, joking. And we want you to stay in the room because you're going to have a final address of CGI, Executive President. So that's it. Good evening. So after these 2 weeks of event, we can only say, wow, this is really fantastic. I could not be here every day for every session, but I really intensely participated in the preparation of this event as a secretary executive of the CGI, one of the sponsors of this conference. And we were deeply involved in its preparation. It's a great joy to see how successful it was. For Brazil, I always dream that we'll fight for something that apparently is impossible, is difficult, it's a challenge. So CGI fought for the civil landmark of the internet for 6, 7, 8 years before it passed. And we have had 12 conferences such as this today. Today, we are having the 13th that is ending. And our dream is to see an authority for data protection operational. And we still have a long way to go, and I am part of the board of the National Authority for Data Protection. We have meetings like 2 or 3 times a month. It's a lot of work, and we want to continue. And I want all countries to be inspired in the global south. If we have a dream, if we have a wish, there's something that we want. If we join our efforts, we will get there. So it's worth it. It's worth insisting. The only way for our governments, and CGI is multi-sector, and we hear the whole society, and we work together with the government, and the government is minority. The majority is not the government, and we were able to attain fantastic results for 26 years I have been a secretary of CGI.br, and we can look at the long path that we have walked with many victories. And today we are ending with another victory. Thank you very much. I would like to thank our international guests. Thank you very much, all our attendees. It has no value if it's just for us, CGI, but this is the participants. You who stayed here to the last minute are the true warriors who deserve a special certificate. Thank you very much for your support. I'm not going to say any names. 20, 30 people were involved in the program, in the commission, many people in infrastructure, sound, audio, translation, really, really fantastic staff. And I need to stop because the light is going to blink again, and then it's going to go black. So I hope to see you back for the 14th seminar next year. Thank you all very much.